Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back for another video. Today is a follow-up to our 10-hour live stream painting this shoe. We tried painting the entire thing in one live stream in about 10 hours. It took a little bit longer than we expected, so this video is going to be a follow-up on everything that we weren't able to complete during that live stream. Go ahead, check that out. If you're interested, we'll have that linked in the description below. We'll throw a little card on the screen, but what we're going to be giving you guys a tutorial on in today's video is how to do that multicolor sort of tie-dye type look to the sock liner of these Jordan 1s. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So since I'm going to be airbrushing this sock liner, now we have to tape off the entire upper of the shoe along with the sole, everything, because when you are airbrushing a sock liner, it's really important to hit it from very weird angles, every angle that you can imagine. So you need to make sure that everything is taped off. So I like to use the classic Scotch beige masking tape. It is the contractor grade 2020 masking tape. And this stuff sticks really well to a nice painted surface, and I like to get really up close, tight, up against my sock liner. Obviously this is you're gonna be able to kind of somewhat push it underneath that little lip of the sock liner. And then since we have a nice solid blue sky panel underneath there, if there is any overspray on the sock liner, that's gonna be super easy to touch up. Now, since we have to tape off the rest of the upper, I'm actually going to be using some saran wrap. This is super easy to work with, and it's great for covering up large portions of the shoe. You might see some other people use garbage bags, computer paper, a lot of different products you can use here, but the saran wrap is super easy to work with. However, since we're going to be heat setting the sock liner, the heat doesn't work very well with the saran wrap, so we need to cover that up also. That's when I'm going to be using some of the Pro Tapes crepe paper. Super light adhesive that's just going to make this entire upper bulletproof, and I'm not going to be worried about any paint leaking anywhere onto your hair. Now, to make sure that we have all of our paint ready for this sock liner, I'm going to be using 11 different colors for this tie-dye pattern. I'm going to be using 2 soft inside each of these colors at a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, a lot of these paints are actually just a lot of your primary colors, and then I actually added in some neons into quite a few of them just to make the colors a little bit more vibrant. And so really all I'm going for here, if we try to narrow it down to a simple style and a simple look, is I'm trying to achieve a pretty simple gradient inside the sock liner. Now, I like to actually start with our hardest color to paint, which is also going to be our lightest color in this case, so I'm going to begin with our yellow. Now, when I'm ready to move on to our next color, which is going to be green, rather than completely cleaning out the airbrush, I'm going to intentionally leave behind a little bit of that yellow. Now, once I spray that green, we essentially have a little bit of that yellow left behind, which is going to help us create somewhat of a softer blend in between each of our colors. So now I'm going to continue to repeat this process for every single color of intentionally not thoroughly cleaning out my gun, leaving behind just a little bit of that paint. This way there's just going to be some of those nice, more subtle blends in between each of the colors. Now, when you begin to work with some of your darker colors, it's really important to try to pay attention to exactly where you're going to be spraying. For example, if you're spraying at the front of the tongue, you want to make sure that you're not going to be spraying dark purple or dark blue at the front of the tongue and have a lot of that overspray end up at the back of your sock liner in any of your yellow areas or anything like that. So always just be paying attention to where you're spraying and what's going to be behind it. So after we have a super light coat of all of our colors, which gets us great coverage, now it's time to move on to our heat setting. And this is the most important step to make sure that that sock liner is going to stay nice and soft. So I like to heat set in about 30-second to 60-second type spurts, and then leave a little bit of time in between, come back to it, heat set again, and make sure that I'm leaving at least 20 minutes or so in between coats. Now, to really make sure that this color is nice and vibrant and solid everywhere and we don't have any of that white peeking out underneath, I'm going to give each of these colors a second coat. We're going to be following that same exact process of intentionally leaving behind a little bit of color in the airbrush. And now what we're really trying to do is make sure that all of our colors are nice and solid. This is where you really want to make sure that you're expanding and opening up the sock liner in a lot of different ways, pulling the tongue forward and back, and really just trying to cover everything up. After that second coat of color is done, now we're going to go ahead and repeat that process of heat setting. And now we're ready for our final step, which is really going to tie everything in together. We're going to be using a tie-dye airbrush stencil, which is really going to help sell that tie-dye effect inside the sock liner. Now, when it comes to color selection for a thing like this, a little rule of thumb that I have is I like to intentionally never use a color that I previously used for the gradient of the sock liner. So even if I want a green tie-dye effect, what I'm gonna do is mix a little bit of white into that green, just so I'm not using the exact shade of green. I'm gonna use a little bit of a lighter green for the actual tie-dye effect. Another thing that I like to do for color placement, especially if you're potentially going for somewhat of a little bit more subtle look with the tie-dye, is to use similar color blocking and color groupings for where you're actually placing the color. So talking about that light green mixture that we already made, I'm gonna be spraying that in similar areas near my green. So I'm gonna spray some of this light green onto the yellow, I'm gonna spray some of that onto the blue, and keep the colors somewhat near each other. Now, since we're obviously working with some heavily curved areas, it's really important to make sure that you're curving the actual stencil to really try to get a nice flat working surface for you to spray through. So for an effect like this, what I'm essentially doing is taking one of each of our colors that we used for the gradient, then picking a lighter or darker shade of that color and using that as my actual tie-dye effect. And one last little tip here I have when using a stencil like this is to make sure that you're also not just using it inside the sock liner, but to achieve that same effect from that tiny little edge that you see when you're looking at the outside of the shoe. Make sure you're also using the stencil on the outside of the shoe to hit that top tiny little portion of the sock liner that you will see when looking at the shoes from the outside. And now all we have left to do is untape them and reveal your tie-dye Chunky Dunky sock liner. Okay, so now you can see here's a look at our Chunky Dunky Jordan 1s finally complete. What I want to do now is walk you guys through anything that we weren't able to feature during our 10-hour live stream. There was a few things that we weren't able to get to, and that ultimately I thought that I would probably be able to finish these shoes in about 10 hours, but even with all my years of experience, I still grossly underestimate sometimes. All in all, these probably took about 20 hours to do. That happens even as you get faster over time and you get more efficient. What ultimately happens is you then become even more of a perfectionist, so things that you probably could have gotten done quicker in the past now take you longer because you're trying to become, like I said, even more of a perfectionist with them. So now I'm just gonna walk you through some of the steps that weren't featured during that 10-hour live stream. So starting off with the tongue, I gave the tongue the same color that we did on the rest of the upper, along with some of that shading to give somewhat of that hair effect, and then we went ahead and added in the cow spots on the tongue also. Now, similar to how I did the shading on the white portions of the upper, I went ahead and did that same exact style on all of the black cow spots, taking a few different shades of some darker grays and some browns and adding those into the cow spots. Now, when it comes to cleaning up any paint that you got onto your midsole, once it's completely dried up, this is super easy to scrape off with a toothpick. Anything that's left behind after that, you can dip a Q-tip in some acetone and rub that right off. I also went ahead and painted all of the stitching on the cowhide panels completely black, just like the factory shoe. I then went ahead and added the cloud stencil on the baby blue uppers. And then it was time to move on to our tongue tag, which I begun by painting completely black. Now, anytime you're working with a black tongue tag and you're trying to get any of your colors to pop in the Jumpman in this case, what I like to do is lay down a base coat of mist first. Now what this is going to do is once I lay down that yellow on top of it, it's going to make sure that it's nice and vibrant and really pops. And our last step for the shoes is going to be to hit them with a finisher. I'm going to be using the Liquid Kicks matte finisher on these. Now this is a pair that I'm super pumped about, and I'm so glad that you guys got to see all of the work that actually goes into a pair of custom shoes. This is a pair that is really a long time in the making, and if I were to have done these many years back, they would have looked completely differently. I would have just had completely white uppers with completely black spots. I wouldn't have added any of that texture, any of that life, any of that stuff that's really gonna help separate it from everybody else. I would have just had a simple gradient in the sock liner. I wouldn't have known even how to do the tie-dye effect in there or anything like that. But these are the types of things that are just really gonna help separate you from the pack in the long run. And this is a theme that you are about to see a lot of people do, and I'm sure you've already seen quite a few different customs done with this theme. So you just really got to find a way to stand out and take pride in making a really premium product, and for us, that continues with the photography. So now let's go show you what we have in mind for these. So here we are with the shoes all done, and we're ready for our photo set for them. Anytime we want to kind of go over the top rather than just going outside, shooting kind of a natural setting type deal, it's always nice to go practical. So we want to try to have as much real in the photo as possible. So real snow, the real Ben & Jerry's pints. Ideally, we would have a much larger sheet of yellow, but since it's a background, we have it with some serious depth, so it's really gonna be easy to Photoshop that. We have the laces that are tucked underneath the insoles and then duct taped to the bottom sole of the shoe. That's how they're hanging from our C-stand that we've shown you in a couple other videos. Ideally, this would be some like nice, real thin fishing wire or something strong enough to wrap around there that would make it even easier to Photoshop out. But these, you know, real thin white shoelaces are gonna be easy to Photoshop out. But, you know, just from the start of it, you know, just taking your time to really put a lot of emphasis and effort into every single step, and that continues when the shoes are done and now with the photography and our presentation. So here's a look at the raw photo. And now you can see the final photo. It went through quite the transformation, but overall we're super pleased with how the photo turned out. And this is the type of stuff that's just really gonna separate you from everybody else, and putting the time into the photo set, something I'll always preach. You want a premium product and you want to charge premium prices, you gotta have premium photography to go along with that. So the photography, that last and final step. Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing this. Thank you so much for watching this video. Go ahead and give it a like if you haven't already. Make sure you're subscribed, and we'll see you guys in that next video.